Now viewers, focus is back on the big story. India has suspended the Indus Water Treaty after the Pahalgam terror attack. Union Home Minister Amit Shah has chaired a meeting with the Union Shakti Minister C.R. Patil and top officials from different ministries. Following the meeting, C.R. Patil has shared the upcoming plans for stopping the Indus water flow towards Pakistan. The minister has shared new plans discussed in the meeting that will be implemented soon as directed by the government. The Home Minister has discussed short-term and long-term plans for cancellation of the Indus Water Treaty in the meeting and the silt from the rivers that will start getting removed very soon. Union Shakti Minister C.R. Patil has issued a strong statement against Pakistan in the wake of India's suspension of the Indus Water Treaty with the neighbouring country. Now, 80% of Pakistan's farm fields depend on water from the Indus system. With the current infrastructure, India can at best store a portion of the water from flowing into Pakistan. Several projects have been planned to harness the Indus system. But the big question is, how long will it take for India to turn Pakistan's taps off completely if it wanted to? Joining me on the broadcast to share more details, in fact, and to speak in detail is Mr. Shivam Dwivedi, advocate and advisor of the Ministry of Finance and a counsel with P&A law offices. Thank you very much, Mr. Dwivedi, for being with us on the broadcast. Now, as we are putting this subject in focus, the main content, in fact, of this entire suspension that has come on the heels of what India has witnessed in the terrorist barbaric attack, the suspension of this 64-year-old Indus Water Treaty has raised critical questions for the two hostile neighbours, and more so, in fact, with the recent ceasefire violations that have happened. Now, does India possess the infrastructural capacity to divert the waters and deprive Pakistan of its lifeline is the big question. How do you see this?
Yes, thank you for having me. First of all, to begin with, the right is very well justified, which India has taken under the Indus Water Treaty and under the international law framework that we have. What we see next, possibly, from the Ministry of Jal Shakti, and we have been seeing these statements of the Secretary as well as the Minister, is that there will be plans in place by the government in near future to have appropriate capacity for reserving these water flow under the Indus water system, and to appropriately utilize these waters within the Indian territory so as to implement the decision that the government has taken, which is the withdrawal from the entire obligations within the treaty itself.
But how do we understand of this fact that if at all the unilateral suspension of the treaty permissible under the international law? Now that is a big question, and for in fact the people who are also looking at India's stand that has held the agreement in abeyance until Pakistan abjured cross-border terrorism, is the unilateral suspension now permissible under the international law? How do we understand the dynamics over it?
Yes, so here it is very much allowed under international law. So what governs the framework of the treaties is the Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties, which has certain provisions which provide for how a treaty would operate, similar to Indus Water Treaty. Now we see that Indus Water Treaty was entered in 1960, and the circumstances in which it was entered into was to have the cessation of hostility or the forms of cross-border terrorism even at that given point in time, also as to say the war situations, they were to be avoided. As a result of it, there was no termination clause in the treaty. Now what we see, and what international law permits under Article 62 of the Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties, that if there is a fundamental change in the circumstances in which the treaty was concluded, which also is evident in the letters shared by the Secretary, Ministry of Jal Shakti on 24th April to the Pakistan Secretary, the counterpart, that also mentions that the entire withdrawal or the abeyance, so as to say, that the government has been using the term, has been effected because of a fundamental change that has happened in the treaty. So international law very much allows for this kind of mechanism to operate, because even when this Vienna Convention was envisaging this particular article for suspension of a treaty, the preparatory works, or so as to say the people who drafted the Vienna Convention, said that a state should not be left, like India in this case, with absolutely no choice if a treaty is not going to provide for a termination clause, or so as to say when the very objective with which the treaty was entered into has failed, and still a state is bound to continue with that treaty and compromise its sovereignty and security, as we have seen in the recent attack.
So, Mr. Dwivedi, now India's suspension of the IWT effectively means that it will no longer have to notify Pakistan about the projects that will be on the western rivers and not even share the data. But what is the legal room for India to have the ability to divert or store the water from these three western rivers, and specifically in legal context, when we talk about how would India stand in the coming days look like?
Yes, so I think India is very much justified in whatever action it has taken. And since, given the requirement of the treaty, will not operate till the time the treaty is kept in abeyance, or so as to say under suspension, as there is no requirement for India to have any data sharing or otherwise, India would do what is best needed for its interests or for its population in this case. And there will be no international obligation that would be imposed on India. Even though there may be a room for the counterpart, that is Pakistan, to consider approaching the competent dispute resolution body under the treaty. But I'm sure that the very fact that this action is pretty much in consonance with international law, and that India is not obliged anymore to share data or to exchange what are the projects that it is working on, India would do what is best for its population.
Well, all right, Mr. Dwivedi, thank you very much for putting this in perspective and also bringing light to the concern that remains very crucial, and as questions are being asked, even as India has the potential and how exactly it continues to go forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Dwivedi, for